Hi folks, Jack Spirko here with the next installment in the permaculture video series that we're doing. A couple notes. You should notice much better video quality on this video. Turns out the iPhone has the ability to shoot HD video out the backside of the iPhone where you're looking through it. But if you turn it around so you can actually see what you're videoing, like videoing your face, not so much. So I'm using this new thing called the swivel. That's what this little thing on my hip is. You probably can't see down there. But as you can see, if I move, the camera follows me. And this is also a microphone. I'm going to tap it, hear that. That's why I think the audio quality wasn't really the very best it could have been in the other videos. It was peeking out. I had it hanging on my neck. You could see it there. So hopefully this will improve the video quality. Bear with me on this. This is a new technology. Using the iPhone, I've gotten great video quality before. I'm hoping with this to be able to do a lot more videos a lot faster. No editing. I can upload it straight from the phone to YouTube, and hopefully I'll got it back to HD quality for you. So with that said, let's go ahead and get into today's episode and today's topic. And this is going to be an important one, and then we're going to start going off into a lot more technique. But before I start showing you techniques, diagrams, how I've done things in the past, how I would do things with, I've got people sending me some plots of their own properties and saying, what would you do here? Before I start doing that, it's very important that we make a distinction about what permaculture is, and that we understand that it's not technique. It is, in the words of its founder, again, Bill Mollison, who I like to quote more than just about anybody else, permaculture is a design system for creating sustainable human environments. That's, to me, the best way to look at it. Notice what I've put in red. Design system creating sustainable human environments. It's a system of design. So what will happen is someone will do something in their backyard that's very organic, very natural, very cool, and quite possibly is a technique used by permaculturists and say, okay, this is permaculture. It's not that it isn't. It might be. It might not be. It depends. Permaculture is much more ecosystemic. You're actually creating entire ecosystems. You're seeing things at a higher level. And the way that we get there is through principles. There's design principles. And I think Mollison has about 34 and Holgram has 12. And I'm going to go over just a couple of them, and we'll be covering different principles. But I was thinking I'll do like an episode with 3 principles, and I'll keep doing an episode until we get all the principles done. I'm like, people are going to be bored. They want to see how to do things. So I'm just going to use a few principles, and I'm going to provide a link, and I'll tell you that we'll be bringing other principles in. You can study them. I'll put a link where you can get all of David's and all of Bill's all summed together in one place for you in the video notes so that you can start to use these principles. Today what I really want to do is just expose you to a few of them. It's not that they're the most important ones. They're relatively easy to understand. And I think that will help you start to see the concept of a system rather than permaculture is I go out in my yard and I plant a garden a certain way. It's far more intricate than that. And if you look at, a great place to start is David Holgram's 12 principles. They're very easy to grasp. They're very elegant in their way, but they're much easier to grasp, I think, for some people anyway, because there's less of them, and they're more defined for you than the 34 that Mollison has. It might be more than 34. It's, off the top of my head, that's what I think it is. Mollison's, to me, are actually more eloquent, because they're shorter and less defined, and they make you think more. And you'll find as you do design, whether it's in your own backyard or for, let's call it a client, whether that's a paid client or a friend, that the more you think, the better your designs will be. And even the more restrictions placed on you, the more complex and elegant your designs become. So it's part of why I like Bill's design principles a little more, even though I have to think more to get them. But let's just go through a couple design principles, and I'll give you some examples of how they apply, and hopefully that'll start to help you see this as a design system rather than a bunch of techniques. The techniques are just means to the end to get the system designed. A few design principles. Work with, not against nature. This is a fundamental principle of permaculture, and we can look at it this way. Let's say we had a piece of property like this, big old square, a few acres, and the contour lines on this property, let's kind of do this. And maybe it's not a big slope. I'm doing a little bit exaggerated because I think that helps people understand them better. But of course, this is the high side, so it's running downhill this way. And there's this ridge here, right? So as this drops off, there's a ridge. the natural flow of water is going to be, let's use a different color. Should have blue for water, but the natural flow of water is going to be primarily here, down this ridge line. Maybe there's a little ridge over here, but there's going to be a lot of water flowing down that ridge line. Now, what modern agriculture would do is go in here and try to make this as flat as possible and smash it flat. And then once that's smashed flat, they'll start, growing corn or soybeans or something like that. Permaculturists would look at this and say, that's not a problem. There's another principle. The problem is the solution. There's a tremendous opportunity here. I have these contour lines, and I can go in here and put in a swale. Let's say, actually, maybe I'm going to come right up here, and this ridge comes on my property, and I'm going to put a little dam right here. So I'll put a little dam right there. It's called a key point dam. Highest point on the land that I can hold water. In a perfect scenario, a true key point works like this, where the land goes from concave to convex. That's a beautiful spot, but we'll leave that for now. I put that little key point dam there, and then I put in a swale. And if you don't know what a swale is, I'll explain it in just a second. But basically, I put this in a swale like this, and I create an overflow point with a sill right here. The water now will flow, actually, it's just very interesting. The water will flow into the dam until the dam's full, and then it will flow back up the swale. And because it follows this contour line, sorry about the bump on the mic there, but as long as it follows this contour line, it's going to move very, very slowly. So now the water comes down. I can take here, and I can grab another swale. And maybe I put my overflow point here. And then maybe I come somewhere along here, and I plant another swale, or create another swale. And I create an overflow point here. And I can keep working that down. And we'll go deeper into swales, but if you want to understand a swale, you've got your hill coming down. You've got a ditch, like this. And we take the material that comes out of the ditch, we mound it up here. And normally in a large swale system for growing trees, that looks more like a mushroom than a hill. The big thing is this is loosely packed, and this will be about 2 meters in width and about 1 meter in depth right here. Okay? And the water will come downgrade into that swale, and instead of tracking down this ridge line, all of a sudden we'll stop it and slow it down. And that will let that water flow out, and then we can start to control it, and we can reduce or eliminate irrigation requirements with this. And we're going to want to plant our hardy trees over here, right? These are going to be our trees that can handle a lot of dryness. And we're going to plant our trees that are water-loving right off into the swale mound and maybe drape down in front of it. We're going to plant all different types of plantings in there. It's going to be a complex system. We're going to actually use this to regrow a forest. Well, this is a principle of design. The water is already got its flow down, and simply by channeling it, we can control it. That's one way to look at this. The other thing is to recognize functional relationships, right? So here's another principle. And again, we're only covering a few principles today. But we need to understand functional relationships. So what that means is how do different systems interact with each other? How does one system support another? And we might look at a classic organic gardening technique, Native American technique here, Three Sisters garden. So in a Three Sisters garden, I come in, and corn's not evil, so I grow some corn plants, right? I know I suck at drawing, guys. Just use your imagination. These are my corn plants, right? Now, the corn by itself is kind of boring. It doesn't have a lot of functionality while it sits there. But now I come behind and I take something like a pole bean and I plant the pole bean right here, and it begins to grow up and around the corn stalk. Right? And I have a bean doing this. So I've got this little bean growing up. Now I've created a functional relationship for the corn. The corn is now providing support. The bean is a climber. And because it's climbing, so now I had to recognize that there was a function and create the relationship. This is how it works in nature, but I've recreated it in an agricultural concept. And I can do this in a perennial way, or I can do this in an annual gardening way, which is more what this is. Now, the corn has a lot of nitrogen requirements, but the beans are a legume, and legumes produce nitrogen. So down here in the root system of the bean, next to the corn, there's little bacteria colonies, and they release nitrogen, and that can be then utilized by the corn. So I've created another functional relationship. Again, this is exactly how nature works. We're mimicking nature when we do this. Now, the other issue that we have with this, and we have now, we want to make sure that both of these plants have plenty of water. And one of the biggest problems with water isn't how much water comes down, but how much water goes up through evaporation. You know, you got your water your garden, and you think, well, I've watered my garden. You go back there like a couple hours later in the summer when it's really hot and the ground's bone dry. Well, the water evaporated. I mean, some of it may have been used by the plants, but now your plants look sad and you're wondering what's going on. So one thing we can do is mulch, right? So we can do a lot of different ways that we can mulch, but in this classic system that the Native Americans used, we would go in here and we would plant squash plants in between here, right? And they call this the Three Sisters. So these squash plants are vining squash. This is not your zucchini that grows in a bush. This is your winter squashes you actually plant in summer, but you harvest in fall and they store through winter, that grow all along the bottom of it. These big leaves create shade that keep the root systems of all three species cool. And because the squash is growing in amongst the corn, it is able to actually gain a little bit of shade. A lot of people think that squash are really sun-loving plants. If you've ever seen a squash completely out in the middle of a field with no shade at all, it looks very, very sad and unhappy in the middle of the day. Its leaves wilt a lot. This is a defense mechanism. By planting it in between the corn and beans, it gets enough sun through, but it also gets enough shade. And this was traditionally done in a mound, a great huge mound, maybe as much as 12 feet across. And your corn is planted like this, maybe 2 rows of it, perhaps even 3, maybe a couple more in the center, and then your beans around your corn, and then your squash is planted in here and encouraged to move out like this. And from that, we get yet another principle, pattern. Isn't that kind of a cool looking pattern? You probably, if you look under enough things under a microscope, you'll probably find a microbe that looks like that. And pattern is everywhere. Not on my list, but another one of the principles. Design from pattern to details. Right? So that's an example of functional relationship and pattern-based design. And what's even cooler, if we think about this, we get a mound. This is like this. That's not a flat circle that we do. We want to do this in a mound. So our corn is like this. Right? And it's growing around. And a lot of people have been talking about hugelkultur lately. This was actually a form of hugelkultur in a way. It wasn't really done with wood. It was done with organic matter. So what these native guys would do is they'd go into an area in the woods, and then they would clear away all of the stuff that was in the way. They'd cut down some trees, they'd create an opening, and they'd clear all of the debris and all the humus and a bunch of the topsoil. They'd just pull it back. And then they would pile up a bunch of branches and material and whatever they, the trees, when they'd cut some limbs off the trees that didn't cut down, they'd put all that stuff, they got to do something with it. They knew if they just left it laying around, it would cause a fire. So then they go and they pile all the humus back up on top of this, and now I've got my mound structure that I can plant my corn and beans into. Well, what does this do? This creates a sponge effect. So if I build this system in the early spring, earlier even than it's not yet time to plant this stuff, because corn needs certain temperature of soil to germinate, and it sits there and it waits, it soaks all this stuff up. And when I plant into it, it's much more likely to survive with less irrigation. And these guys didn't plant 1 or 2 of these, they planted hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these, and corn, bean, and squash together provided a kind of a complete nutritional profile survival diet. So there is function, and there's also working with nature. Instead of fighting things, they actually built it mimicking nature. And then we have to think about stacking functions and time. All right? So stacking is another principle, and people generally understand stacking functions. We can, again, look at this function relationship, and we're stacking the functions by putting as many of them in there as we can. Natural molds, nitrogen being fixed and shared between the plant species, moisture retention based on organic matter use. So we're stacking all of these functions together. But we're also stacking in time. You don't really see it as much here, but we have to look at it this way. Normally, we have our corn. There's our corn plants. Again, I'm not even going to try to draw good. But normally this space that's here would only have corn in it. But now we've put the beans and the squash in. So we've stacked the functions and we've stacked the space. But we've also stacked the time. Because the corn, when it's little bitty, if I plant a bean on there and the bean actually competes with it, it's going to cause a problem. So I need to let my corn get up about halfway grown. Then I come in and plant a bean. Well, this corn is going to grow, get its leaves. I got to learn how to draw, huh, guys? And get its little ears. And we're going to come by, we're going to harvest those ears. And this thing's going to turn brown and be dead, but it'll still stand up. And the beans will harvest the pole beans late into the year, just like the squash. The squash will grow right up to the first frost and keep producing. So now, the space that normally we would have had to plant the corn, then we would have had to go in and take the corn down, and then maybe try to squeeze in a second crop. By stacking the time feature, we can do this as well. We can do this in a forest. We go in and we plant a fruit tree. All right? So we want a fruit tree. And it's doing its thing, but if we plant it by itself, it's not going to do well. So we'll go in and we'll plant a whole bunch of much faster growing leguminous trees, just like the legume bean. And we might plant tons of these guys, you know? Might plant 10 of these for every one fruit tree. Let's make the fruit tree more obvious. Put some fruit on the fruit tree. Well, when all of these trees reach maturity, we're going to have some bushes, and this is getting into like forest design and stuff that we're going to cover later, but we're going to have our little herbaceous system, and I will get some other colors to help you. But we've got bushes in there. There's too much stuff in there. It won't all fit. But as when the fruit tree is young, this shade will help it. All of this nitrogen will help it. But as the forest begins to grow out, I can come in here and I can cut the top right off of this tree, all of these legume trees. And I can put the material straight to the ground as mulch for the fruit tree. Right? And they'll grow back. Coppicing or pollarding, depending on what height we do this at. And then I can go in there and I can do it again. And I can do it again. And I can do it again. And eventually some of these trees just give up. They quit. Some of these bushes too, maybe they're leguminous bushes. And eventually I end up with my fruit tree with maybe one leguminous or support species of some sort of tree here, maybe a little bit of an herbal layer down here, maybe a bush over here, right? I really do suck at drawing, I know. But this will be what I'll end up with. But I was way overstacked in the beginning because this tree needed support. Because if I'm planting tons of these trees, and I'm not out there with a bucket watering them and composting them every day, they need support. This is a natural system. But I've stacked it not just in function, I've stacked it in time. Because I was growing all this mulch and all this soil improvement in the space that was eventually only going to have one tree in it. By stacking the space, I've stacked the time as well. This is how, and this is simple. This is very simple, very basic stuff. This is how complex this design system for creating sustainable human environments is. These are the type of things we're going to go deeper into. Today's lesson really was not about how to do this stuff. I just used it as a way to explain things to you, right? It's about understanding what we're really doing, because I'm not telling you go home and do this or go home and go do that. I'm telling you take a look at the landscape you're working with and work with, not against nature. Understand how to channel the natural energies on the land. Recognize the functional, what's already functioning together. Where can you go out in the forest and walk and just take a look? If you want inspiration, walk through a forest. Look how the natural systems function together. Go home and choose your own species of plants that emulate that, put them together in functional relationship, and stack and function in time. And that's just the beginning. We're just scratching the surface. We have 34 principles from Mollison. We have 12 from Holgram. And there's plenty of other people creating principles and creating techniques. This is what permaculture is all about. Hope you're enjoying the journey so far. We're going to keep going. I'll see you again tomorrow.